Racing from the high-low Cajun Nationals. Super Gas and Super Street Racing, California style. Paul Candy's Floating Fantasyland. And Darrell Gwynn arrives back home. These stories and more on this edition of the video magazine of Championship Drag Racing, NHRA Today. Last Sunday, as British Airways flight number 293 eased its way up to the gate at Miami International Airport, a small crowd gathered to offer a welcome home to Darrell Gwynn. While Darrell was transferred to a waiting ambulance, his parents and fiancée met with friends and reporters before joining Darrell at Jackson Memorial Hospital.
It's for sure not the greatest circumstances, but we're here, and hopefully things will turn around and get better from this point.
We know it's going to be a long road, and we're going to just take it a day at a time, and we're grateful for what we do have, and we're not going to worry about what we don't have. And we're grateful we still have our Darrell.
Upon arrival at Jackson Memorial Hospital, Darrell underwent a variety of medical procedures under the direction of Dr. Barth Green of the Miami Project to Cure Paralysis.
The examination at this point is compatible with what we call a complete C5 quadriplegia. But the usual prognosis for this type of injury is that 90-some%, 93 to 95% of people don't recover further function except in the arms and possibly hands with this type of injury. And we anticipate on Friday that he will undergo major spinal surgery to try and reconstruct his cervical spinal column. The purpose of the surgery is not necessarily to affect the paralysis, but more so to stabilize his neck so that he can begin to get out of bed and begin the rehabilitation process. My experience with Mark Bonacontis and the Darrell Gwynns of the world is that if you've got the right blood, if you're a winner before you get paralyzed, you rise to the occasion and are successful after you're paralyzed.
A later report states that the surgery that had been planned to stabilize Darrell's spinal column has been postponed until next week due to a slight fever. On Thursday, a press conference was held in Miami to announce plans for Darrell's racing team for the remainder of the 1990 season.
We sat at length and discussed who we would like to have as a driver for the car, and at this time I'd like to present the new driver, Frank Hawley.
The selection of Frank Hawley as the new driver for Gwynn Racing ends weeks of speculation over who would fill the seat of the quickest top fuel car in drag racing. The choice also confronted Hawley with mixed emotions.
When Darrell called and asked me to drive the car, I said yeah, but I felt kind of strange. I'm flattered that he asked. I'm going to try and do my best, but really didn't feel like a cause for celebration.
To many drag racing insiders, Frank Hawley was the logical choice to join the Gwynn Racing team, as he has been involved with the sport for most of his life.
When I turned 16, my parents didn't have a lot of money, but they had enough money to get this old used dragster and said, we're going to find out if he wants to be a drag race driver or not. So they put me in an old front motor top fuel dragster, and then we went alcohol funny car racing for a while and actually ran out of money. My parents mortgaged their house for the second time and quit in 1979. I thought I was going to have to go get a regular job.
Hawley was rescued from a 9-to-5 existence by a phone call from Austin Coyle, offering Frank a job as driver of the fabled Chi-Town Hustler funny car. The Coyle-Hawley combination proved quite successful, winning the Winston Championship in 1982 and 83. After a relatively disappointing season in 1984, Hawley hung up his helmet and looked for a new challenge.
In '85, I stopped driving and opened the drag racing school because although I wasn't driving, I still wanted to be involved in the sport, and I just dearly love working with new people and people that have an enthusiasm for drag race driving.
Periodically, during the latter half of the 80s, Hawley returned to the cockpit driving one of Larry Minor's top fuelers. Throughout his career, Frank Hawley has triumphed in whatever he has attempted, but now he has set a new goal for himself.
I'm anxious to get in the car and to win some races for Darrell, but every time I think of this opportunity, I think of Darrell. And I'm just trying to fill his shoes, and they're big shoes to fill because he is one of the best drivers that's ever raced.
So after 7 weeks of uncertainty, this chapter of the Darrell Gwynn story has drawn to a close. But for Darrell and his family, there is still a long way to go. Friends and fans can assist the Gwynns by contacting the following address: the Darrell Gwynn Recovery Fund, First National Bank of South Miami, 5750 Sunset Drive, South Miami, Florida, 33143. One wants a place to get away from it all. Some go to the mountains, others to the beach or to the golf course. For Paul Candies, the owner of the Mark Oswald-driven funny car, it's that 130-foot-long house barge tied up here on the bayou in his hometown of Des Allemands, Louisiana. Now, our visit here today will give us a fascinating insight into the lifestyle of one of drag racing's staunchest supporters. And in that Paul is a funny car racer, it's only appropriate that our race coverage from last weekend's high-low Cajun Nationals in Baton Rouge begin with that category. Here's Dave McClellan.
Steve, qualifying was dominated by one car, and we're talking, of course, about John Force. This was the fourth time this season that John has put his Oldsmobile into the #1 spot. This time, he had an elapsed time of 5.36 seconds, a great time under tricky conditions. In Sunday's eliminations, Force's mastery of State Capitol Dragway continued as he set a string of low elapsed times on the way to a semifinal round pairing with points leader Ed McCulloch. At the green, McCulloch in the far lane had the quicker reaction time, but then his car lost traction and Force stormed to a spot in the finals. Meeting Force for the high-low Cajun Nationals Championship was one of the rising stars of NHRA funny cars, Californian Richard Hartman. In only his 5th national event in a nitro car, Hartman relied on a string of consistent times to earn a place in the finals. In a superb race, Force grabbed the initial advantage with a quicker reaction time, and he just held off his younger opponent. It was a close race at the finish line, John.
Very exciting. Like I said before, anytime you're racing a young kid, well, that's tougher than racing a snake.
I'll tell you one thing, this big win moved you into #2 in the point standings.
I could tell by the look in my crew's eyes, Austin Coyle, they were very happy, but most of all, the ace has been, we're turning around. We're doing some dealing now.
Ed McCulloch stays #1, John Force 2nd, Bruce Larson 3rd, Mark Oswald in the #4 spot, and Casey Spurlock held on to #5. Steve?
When's the last time you saw a fireplace like that on something that floats? We're in Oak Stairway, or many of the other amenities here in the Grand Salon of the Candies 500. Paul, this is really quite a package.
Well, the package is all about having fun. You know, my family really enjoys having a good time, and this is what we use. We like to take it down the bayou to go on fishing trips, and up the bayou to go on hunting trips, and sometime we get to spend some time here with my father, the captain, and he has people over as his guests, like we had at the last Cajun Nationals, our annual red beans and rice and fried catfish deal. And
That galley, you can do some cooking.
yeah, we do a little cooking here. I'd say we brought her down in the river for the Super Bowl, and I'd say we probably fed 150, 175 people during the Super Bowl.
How many people can you overnight?
We overnight about, let's see, 16 in one bunk room and 4 in another. We do about 26 pretty comfortably.
Thanks for having us on board.
Thank you.
You know, as you may recall, on last week's show, Don Garlitz told us about the problem of hydraulicing engines. Well, this week he concludes that report, and it seems that one team, the one owned by our gracious host, Paul Candies, may have found a solution. Don?
Last week we explained the problem of hydraulicing. We're at Mark Oswald's car, and hydraulicing is a situation where the driver momentarily lifts, steps back on the throttle, and the fuel fills the chambers and literally lifts the cylinder head off the engine. Now, Candies and Hughes and Mark Oswald have worked on this problem, and they have tried to alleviate it to a certain extent. One thing they have done is increase the fuel lines returning back to the tank so that when the driver lifts off the throttle, more fuel will be able to return to the tank than normal, allowing not quite so much to go into the engine. But the second trick, and I think much more important, is the clutch sequence. They have devised a system on the clutch, whereas when Mark lifts off the throttle, the clutch sequence stops. The throw-out bearing stops returning so that the clutch stays in that mode until he steps back on it. Therefore, instead of the clutch continuing to lock up hard, the car is slipping the clutch and allows him a little time to get back on the throttle. It tends to work, and believe me, it's got the other drivers talking to themselves.
Castrol presents the GTX Pipeline, the latest news from the world of drag racing.
Well, there are changes afoot on the top fuel team of Don Prudhomme. Crew chief Mike Klober has decided to leave the team.
Well, I'm going to miss everybody out here, too, but I'm going to go home and spend some time with my wife and just going to have a little bit of fun and relax and just, relieve a little bit of pressure from racing and just kind of have some fun.
You know, this drag racing and any form of racing can really pull on you a lot, you know, especially when you have families back in California and you're out here on the road. It's real tough, and I don't think that the people realize sometimes what it takes and the dedication to do this sort of thing, and sometimes it just grows a little bit thin on the other end, so I think he needs to spend a little bit of time home, and who knows, he might be back.
Then, this Wednesday, Dave Saddles, who'd only been on the Prudhomme payroll for a few weeks, left the team. If you got a toolbox, I know where you can get a job. If you're among the millions of people who enjoy the sport of drag racing, there's a golden opportunity waiting for you as a member of the NHRA. For only $42 per year, you get to be part of the world's largest automotive sanctioning body. And you can show your membership with pride with a variety of items, a pin, patch, and window decal. You can keep track of the action with the NHRA rulebook and a subscription to National Dragster magazine. And if you call the number on your screen, you'll receive a copy of Diamond P Sports video, Drag Racing 89. So call today and get in on the excitement. They don't call them one-armed bandits for nothing. Part of the upper deck of the Candies 500 is this incredibly lovely game room, so tastefully decorated, as is everything on this barge. And of course, the requisite wet bar with refrigerator and freezer. How about your own blackjack table? That could be an awful lot of fun. And you can just tell, if this room could talk, it could tell some stories. Now, if it gets a little stuffy in here, or the ducks are flying over and you want a better view, no problem. Just raise the roof. And when it's fully opened, it gives you almost the unobstructed view of a top fuel dragster driver. Dave McClellan?
Steve, coming into the high-low Cajun Nationals, Lori Johns held nearly a 300-point lead over her nearest competitor, Joe Amato. But that points lead disappeared in the first round as Johns, in the far lane, pulled a wheel stand and was passed by Mike Brotherton. Brotherton then advanced to the semifinals, where he lined up against defending Winston champion Gary Ormsby. And at the green light, Ormsby in the near lane reacted quicker and held the advantage to reach the finals for the second time this year. The other side of the eliminations ladder was dominated by a pair of Texans, Gene Snow and Eddie Hill, who eventually met in the other semifinal. At the start, Hill in the near lane had the better reaction time, but defending Cajun Nationals champion Snow nosed ahead at the finish.
So after 3 rounds of eliminations, this driver, Gene Snow, was matched in the finals against Gary Ormsby, the finals of Top Fuel Eliminator at the high-low Cajun Nationals. This marked the second race this season that Snow has made the finals. The other time came at Houston in the Super Nationals.
But the Snowman's 1990 final round misfortunes continued as Ormsby cut a superb light, giving him an initial 0.07 of a second lead that held up against Snow's quicker elapsed time.
Gary, your first victory of the year moves you into the #2 spot in the point standing.
We're really pleased with this victory. Obviously, it's our first, but we're pleased to win here also.
The victory by Ormsby shuffles the Winston point standings. Lori John stays on top. Ormsby in second. Joe Amato now third. In fourth is Gene Snow. And fifth, Dick LaHaye. Steve?
Fishing is a way of life here on the bayous, but last weekend, a lot of folks hung up the Gone Drag Racing sign to participate in sportsman eliminations at the high-low Cajun Nationals. Here's Bob Fry's report.
Steve, experience was the key in the sportsman ranks at the high-low Cajun Nationals, as all 7 winners had scored victories in previous national events. In top alcohol dragster, Amy Falk in the far lane benefited from a foul start by 1989 Winston World Champion Tom Conway, and the victory gave Falk a rare drag racing hat trick.
In '79, I won the Superstock World Championship, and then in comp, I went to comp eliminator, and I've won a national event in comp. So this kind of completes the deal in the sportsman classes for me, and that was a personal goal to win in each thing that I'd been in.
In stock eliminator, Ron Gary in the far lane won his second Oscar in 2 weeks, courtesy of a red lighting Dave LeBlanc. Prior to this season, Gary's most recent national victory came at the Spring Nationals way back in 1968. And another veteran, S.E. Buchanan in the near lane, took a narrow win in Superstock over Keith Maui. Here are other winners from Baton Rouge. One of the unique things about the sport of drag racing is that it's always been such a family affair, whether it's bringing the family and the kids to the races to watch or participating in the sport itself. One of the more unique families involved with automotive racing is the Seipel family, the family that operates the magnificent Sears Point International Raceway. It may come as a surprise to know that of all the members of the Seipel family, Mother Georgia is the most involved in racing. Not only does she drive, she's also managed several racetracks throughout the years.
I went to work at Baylands Raceway at Fremont, and then when it went away a couple of years ago, Sears Point asked me if I'd come and help manage that track, so I do manage Sears Point track strip for them.
While Georgia has stayed busy as a racer and track manager, husband Ted has managed to capture 3 national event wins. And in keeping with the family tradition, 19-year-old son Kyle has joined the Super Gas ranks. Father and son often find themselves paired against each other, as in the 3rd round of the '89 California Nationals.
He's always challenged me in everything we ever did, and the ping pong games and the basketball and the video games and the whole thing. It's just an extension.
Well, it's kind of weird. Ever since I've been a kid, I've been watching him race, and all of a sudden I'm up there racing against him. It's just, he's a tough competitor.
Kyle's quite a tough competitor himself. After only 2 years behind the wheel, he's already taken home his first national event win and earned the nickname Quarter Mile Kyle. At his age, there's plenty of time to build on that victory and settle the score with his dad.
Oh, he'll say if you beat me, you might not get a ride home or something, but there's nothing serious. We're just racers out there to have fun.
Well, the home track advantage worked for Kyle Seipel up to the final round of Super Street at last weekend's Winston Drag Racing Series event. But Gary Erickson in the near lane took the win light when Kyle broke out by a mere 0.002 of a second. In Superstock, Jeff Lane captured his 2nd win of the year with a classic wheel-standing start, and he dedicated his top qualifying position and victory to his crew chief, his mom. Meanwhile, in Comp Eliminator, Mike Robinson in the far lane outran a slowing Bill Moropoulos to capture his first major win. It was another victory credited to a fine feminine touch, his wife's. Here are other winners from Sears Point. Winston Drag Racing Series competitors were also in action on the other side of the country at Cayuga, Ontario's Dragway Park. Here are the winners from Division 1. For NHRA Today, I'm Bob Fry.
You know what I love about this barge boat? It's so simple. There's no propulsion. The tug moves it around. And if you happen to be someplace out in the wild where there's no water or no power, that's no problem. You just bring along the support barge. It has holding tanks for sewage, fresh water tanks, and it generates its own power. Speaking of generating power, pro stockers were doing plenty of that last weekend at the High-Low Cajun Nationals. Here's Dave McClellan's final report.
Steve Pro Stock Eliminator at the High-Low Cajun Nationals was another typically wide-open affair, with 2/3 of the field having qualified under the existing track record. Leading the pack was Warren Johnson's Olds Cutlass, but close behind were the 2 men who had met in the finals in Memphis, Darrell Alderman and Larry Morgan. These 3 drivers worked their way into the semifinals, where they were joined by the 4th fastest qualifier, Mark Powick. In the first semifinal run, Powick in the far lane reacted quicker and ended Warren Johnson's hopes for a 3rd Cajun Nationals championship. While in the other semifinal, Larry Morgan made up for a slow getaway reaction time with top-end power.
So that brought us to the championship round of Pro Stock Eliminator, where we found Larry Morgan for the 3rd race in a row. His competition was a man that has not seen a final round since 1988. That came at the Winter Nationals out of Pomona, California, and we're talking, of course, about Mark Powick.
As the 2 drivers lined up for an all-Ohio final, Morgan knew that a victory would vault him into the Winston Championship lead. And just as he had done in the earlier eliminations, he left the line 2nd, but came home 1st.
Right now, these guys are going to be gunning for us, we hope, red lighting and things like that. So, I mean, anything could happen, but I'll tell you, we're going to continue to work hard and try and stay on top.
Morgan moved into the lead in the point standings. Warren Johnson is 2nd. Jerry Ekman 3rd. Right behind him, Bob Glidden and Bruce Allen, number 5.
Thank you, Dave. And thank all of you for joining us on NHRA Today. Usually, when I leave a location, I look forward to finding a nice restaurant and having a good meal. Today's different. I'm going back in the location for a spectacular meal. The resident chef has prepared all kinds of Cajun specialties, shrimp etouffee, oysters on the half shell, jambalaya, and if I don't blow up after all of this, I'll be back next week with more drag racing stories. For Dave McClellan, Don Garlitz, and Bob Fry, I'm Steve Evans. Thanks again for joining us on NHRA Today. That's a wrap, gang. Let's eat.
NHRA Today has been brought to you by Castrol GTX, engineered for today's smaller cars, and by Firestone, makers of Firehawk performance tires for the street, the track, and the strip, tires that meet the test. Promotional consideration provided for and a fee paid by this special offer from Diamond B.
For years, you've all loved Diamond P Sports Home Video, Decade of Thrills, the ultimate drag racing experience. Well, I've got some great news. Don Perdomo and I are back with the all-new 90-minute Decade 2, the thunder of the 80s. Eddie Hill cracks the fours, then flies away. Connie Coletta marches past 290. Ed McCullough and John Collins will never forget the Cajun Nationals of 84, nor Kenny Bernstein, Maple Grove, PA, 87. Glidden won his 50th and his 75th in the same decade. It's all in Decade of Thrills, too. To get your copies, send $24.95 to the address in your screen, or better yet, call 1-800-767-1600. Visa and MasterCard accepted, no CODs. Call now, 1-800-767-1600.
NHRA Today has been a presentation of Diamond B Sports.